So I started looking at your website and everything that you do. You're a type 1 diabetic, and I was like, yeah, we need to hear more about that topic. So Hanna Boethius is here for the 2016 Low Carb Cruise. Give it up for her.
Oh, there you are. I heard a voice in a language I didn't understand yet, and somewhere really, really far away. When I finally opened my eyes, I had no idea where I was. I saw two paramedics standing above me and figured this might have been something diabetes related. Instantly, I felt like absolute crap. We're allowed to say that now. I was nauseous. I had the headache from hell, and every single cell of my body hurt. I've had diabetes since I was 2. I started to explain myself. I know, you told me before, one of the paramedics said. I'm like, oh no. I had no recollection of this at all. What else did I say or do during this wonderful unconscious time of mine? So as I was brought into the hospital by ambulance, vague memories started appearing. I must have instinctively known that my blood sugar was really low because I'd gone into a grocery store to buy a bottle of juice. I also remember trying to pay with the case for my blood sugar meter twice. Another sign. After that, it was just all black. I had suffered an acute low blood sugar. I had passed out and collapsed at the grocery store, was trying to pay for my life-saving bottle of juice. And it was a terrible event, and luckily it didn't happen very often back then either, but that's what happened that time. So I'm very lucky to be alive because someone called the ambulance and they helped me in time, and that I get to share my story here with you guys today. So this was just one example of what was a constant threat to me before, and it was part of everyday life. I could go up, I could go down. I was on the blood sugar roller coaster, and my blood sugars could be up, down, everything in between, even doing the little loopy things, seemingly without any explanation whatsoever. So, my name is Hanna Boethius. This is me when I had been diagnosed for just a couple of months with my baby sister back then. But I've lived with type 1 diabetes as my constant companion for over 30 years. And I've been bullied, I've been depressed, I've been felt let down and super embarrassed by it. And I've been wanting to give up more times than I can count. I've hated intensively, and some days I still really hate diabetes. I've tried everything throughout the years to manage my condition, but nothing that any of my healthcare teams in 5 different countries could advise me on helped. So, as I'm sure you can all guess, the single best thing that I've done for myself, my well-being, and my diabetes was to cut down on the carbs that I ate, which is something that I did 5 years ago about. And this is when I was studying nutrition, and my teacher pointed me out in front of the class when we were talking about carbohydrates and insulin and their role in the body and how everything works and the connection between them. And he said, Hanna, you should probably think twice about what you're eating because you can't even make insulin. That was my aha moment. I'm like, oh yeah, this makes sense. This is, everything that I've been looking for 26 years is right in this sentence. So then I started a very liberal paleo approach at first because, of course, I've been brainwashed for 26 years to think that carbs are awesome. And I've gradually gone down to a ketogenic LCHF, so very, very low carb, which works the best for me and my diabetes and my values. And ketones, even for type 1 diabetic, because the whole ketoacidosis thing, is not dangerous in small amounts. It's when the ketones are high you need to worry. And this can be really easily avoided if you just take your insulin, eat nutritious food, and stay hydrated. Oh, and don't get sick. That's the other one. Yeah. So today, I eat about 30 grams of carbs per day, which means that I can take 20 to 25% of the insulin that I used to take 5 years ago. And I really do feel healthier than ever. I know a lot of people have said that during these days already, but it really is the way it is. And I've lost a bit of weight. My blood pressure is now normal. I've gone from taking 2 blood pressure medications to just a smidge of 1. And I have an excellent cholesterol panel. And my blood sugars are now manageable with the help of this diet and a few other things, as you will see. And on top of this, which ties together with the topic of my talk today, my A1C is in the healthy range. Although I've lived with diabetes for this long time. So, disclaimer. Warning, I have no medical education, not formally at least. But what I'm about to tell you is what I've found that works for me and numerous of my clients. All right, so today I'm looking forward to sharing with you how I lowered my A1C from double digits to 5.5%. And how I've become the healthiest and happiest that I've ever been, in terms of diabetes, at least. And for tighter control of your blood sugar and your A1C, you should probably start by looking at these 5 areas. So, welcome to the slightly abbreviated, because I can't fit all the 11 points in today, Lower Your A1C Masterclass. So, before we take action, we need to know the background. So what is A1C? Well, it's hemoglobin A1C actually, and it's usually explained as showing your average blood sugar, how it's been for the past 8 to 12 weeks, which is not really the full truth because it's all about glycation. So when you eat sugar, glucose, or various forms of sugars, attached to the hemoglobin, which is part of your red blood cells, which carries oxygen around your system. The red blood cells live for 8 to 12 weeks, and the sugar that is attached to this is proportional to how much sugar you have in your system. So the HbA1c actually shows how high your average blood glucose has been in terms of how much sugar has attached to the red blood cells. So you can think of it this way, that the blood sugar is actually a still photo, and the A1C shows you the full movie, director's cut and everything. So the test results can be influenced by other things but your blood sugar, of course. And these include things like anemia, or increased red blood cell count or turnover, blood transfusions, but also things like vitamin C and E levels, and medications such as aspirin and dapsone and all these wonderful people. So it's not the most all-telling test, but it's still a pretty good marker to show where you're at. Because, for example, if you have many high blood sugars and you also have many low blood sugars, your average will still be okay, which gives you an okay A1C. But in that case, you also need to look at, for example, the standard deviation of your daily blood sugar values in combination with your A1C, just to give it a fuller picture, so you know a little bit more. So these are the official goal ranges, and as a right off the bat, we can probably all agree that 5.6 is already a little bit too high for being normal. I would personally say that a range closer to 5.0 is normal. Prediabetes is between 5.7 and 6.4%, and diabetes is over 6.5%. These are the famous 50 Shades of Diabetes, which shows in color coordinated wonderfulness how bad or good your A1C is in comparison to the other values. So if we just take myself as an example, because that's easy, it's handy, and I know what I'm talking about. I've gone from here, I've trickled, danced, and done the salsa all around this wonderful chart, back and forth sometimes, a little up and down, and I've finally landed up at the almost green there. For now. We'll see how far we get. So this has undoubtedly been a really tough journey, and I would lie if I wouldn't say that diabetes can easily develop into a full-time job. That's how demanding it can be if you're really determined and you really want to get somewhere. But the benefits that you get from lowering your A1C and getting healthier, happier, and living a better life are vast, and they are so worth it. All right, next. I heard we were talking about graphs before. I had to shove a few of them in here too. So, what are the benefits of lowering your A1C? And why should you bother, considering you have so many other things on your mind regarding diabetes the whole time? So this is the DCCT graph. It's an old classic from 1993, although it was published 3 years later. And it shows the damaging factors of high blood sugars and high A1Cs. So basically what we can see here is that we have the A1C level on the bottom and the relative risk of various complications on the other axis, and we can see that both vision problems, kidney problems, nerve damage, and all the other fun things that diabetics are told that are going to happen sooner or later anyway, increase the higher an A1C you get. And as soon as you get up to double digits, you have a 10-fold risk of getting or of developing these complications, or some of them. So just summarizing this is lowering your A1C means that you're lowering your risk of complications. And that is a pretty awesome thing to do, because you don't want to live with any of those. Another thing is that normal blood sugars almost ensure that you don't get diabetic ketoacidosis. And this graph is data from T1D Exchange, and it's compiled by my wonderful friends over at Type 1 Grit, showing that the further down in A1C you get, the lower risk you have of potentially deadly ketoacidosis, which is when the body just goes wildfire on producing ketones and has nothing else to push it back down with. And also another thing, which is, I can't put on a graph, but your general self-esteem gets so much better. You feel better, you do better, and you don't have to feel ashamed when you talk to other diabetics or even your healthcare team, because they have an affinity of trying to push you down low. And so you're really seeing yourself in a new light, almost. And because you're healthier and happier about yourself, your life and your diabetes, you've really found the key to motivate yourself to keep going, because it is a full-time, and not a full-time job, but it is a very long-term job. It takes a lot of time from you, and it won't stop. It's lifelong, at least if you have type 1. Type 2, you have certain things you can do. Anyway, so these are my 5 top tips to lowering your A1C. And fairly surprising to this group, but hey, let's do it anyway. Eat low carb. It's really the key to lowering your blood sugar and your A1C for that. So, because you eat less carbs, it has less effect on your blood sugar. This is a super simple equation. And this was the way I wasn't quite around, but they treated diabetes 100 years ago. And somewhere around the middle there, we got lost. And I'm hoping that we can finally soon, without being too impatient, bring it back to more of that kind of treatment. So this means, of course, eat real food, healthy fats, and don't, eat any prepackaged stuff. I'm sure you all know the drill already, and we've heard it plenty of times today already, so we'll skip that. But how low you go is individual. For some, a ketogenic way of eating is perfect. For others, a more liberal, low-carb plan is a lot better for them. And eating ketogenically for a type 1 diabetic, as I've already mentioned, is not a problem, because ketosis and ketoacidosis are not the same thing. You develop diabetic ketoacidosis from the lack of insulin, not by the amount of carbs you eat or the low ketones you have in your body. And this lack of insulin you can get on any food, any diet you follow. It's not only because you develop a small amount of ketones in your body that you automatically get ketoacidosis. So, although you eat very few carbs, it might not be that you can actually skip your insulin, although a lot of type 2s who try this can and are able to, and I'm super happy every time that happens. And most type 1s can reduce their insulin dosage at least. And so intermittent fasting can also be an option, because it keeps the blood sugar level for that many more hours of the day. And if you have problems in the weight loss department, some studies have shown that that might help too. But also this is how you do this is also individual. Generally, I usually recommend about a 16-8 approach to start off with, a few times a day, or a few times a week even, is helpful. And that basically means skipping breakfast and just eating lunch and dinner. And during this time, it's important to check your blood sugar still, because in case something goes wrong, you know where you are and where you should be normally, and then you can always take the measurements to stop it if you have to. And don't be afraid to actually interrupt it if you have to, because no one gets a medal from getting sicker. Thirdly, what's important to mention here is the law of small numbers, which is a term that I've borrowed from Dr. Richard Bernstein. So basically this goes back to my first point of the slide, that the fewer carbs that you eat, the less insulin you have to take. And this is really simple. And this also means that there's less room for mishaps. And that's in terms of blood sugar. Even whether we're talking about it going high or going low, there's less chance of mishaps. Because a game of large numbers where you eat a ton of carbs and try to cover it with a ton of insulin, it's not going to work. You're not going to win, and you're going to end up guesstimating a lot of the time. Point number 2, medication. And I'm going to primarily talk about insulin here, but I'll also mention a few others towards the end. So the foundation of your blood sugar is your basal background long-acting insulin, whatever you want to call it. And this is independent of what type of diabetes you have, or even if you're healthy. So, do you actually know what your basal insulin does to your blood sugar? And here it's important that you set your dose correctly if you take it externally, or manipulate it if you make it still. And this I recommend by doing a fully fasting basal test, for example, which is when you check if your blood sugar goes up or down without food or medication. And this can easily be at home. It's not a problem. It's over in a day, or you can divide it up however you do it, just as long as you do it. And this is where, for type 2s, it becomes really important to have full check of what your fasting blood sugar is, because this is the only thing you can measure at home. You can't measure your insulin levels at home, as far as I'm concerned, at least. And this shows how your body is utilizing the insulin that it makes when you're fasting throughout the evening or night. And then, secondly, it's also very important to keep track if you're taking mealtime insulin. How much do you need? This is dependent on what you eat, when you eat, how you eat, but it's really important to know and to dose this correctly. And here it's also important to know that protein and fat can also raise your blood sugar in many ways, but of course a lot less than carbohydrates. And you might need to take insulin for them too, even though you're thinking you're not eating any carbs. And the postprandial, which is the after you've eaten, after mealtime spikes in blood sugar, is easily avoidable by actually taking your insulin earlier. So I generally recommend a time window of 5 to 20 minutes before you eat. They should take your insulin, and there you have to play around and have a little error and trial and error to see what works the best for you. And if you keep having low blood sugars, you're taking too much insulin. There's no other way you can get that many low blood sugars so that it would actually make sense. So you won't go low or too low without any medications. And this is, again, the importance of the other 2 points, that you're taking the correct amount of insulin. This is, of course, with metformin. If you're only taking metformin, it's a lot less likely or even impossible, but when we're talking about insulin, this is really important. Also, dawn phenomenon. So you have to figure out if you have dawn phenomenon and how easily it is, or how bad it is. So if your blood sugar is high in the morning, although you went to bed all right in the evening, that means that the liver dumps glucose for you to wake up energized. And this is, of course, easier with an insulin pump to regulate, but it goes back to the long-term insulin testing. And you can also try to eat a fat snack before bed, because the liver doesn't dump glucose into a fat body. So insulin can also go bad. It's only guaranteed to last for 1 month outside of the fridge, and for example, cold or warm temperatures can influence the durability of it. And if you're eating metformin, make sure you're talking to your doctor whether that dose is correct and the timing is good for that. And also statins, which are cholesterol lowering medications, can cause blood sugars to go up. So I recommend you do your own research there. Thyroid medications need to be properly adjusted, because a well-functioning thyroid can also keep blood sugar levels level. And some pain medication can also elevate levels, and this you'll have to check with your doctor. Point 3, frequent checking. This means you'll have to keep an eagle eye on your blood glucose levels. So at what time do you wake up in the morning? What is your level then? What is it before a meal? An hour after? 2 hours after? Before bed? In the middle of the night? This is, of course, a curve that you will have to make for yourself, unless you have one of these wonderful things called a CGM, which is the continuous glucose monitors, which you can see the graph at the bottom. because that shows you where your blood sugar is at all times. And this, most modern blood glucose meters have this function. Go check what your average blood glucose reading is on that, and aim for blood values under that, or right at it. Because I used to get so mad when my blood sugar wasn't perfect, but then I realized quickly that it doesn't have to be perfect, it just has to be at that or slightly below my current average. And this is also, of course, important to work down slowly. And if we've ever worked together, you know what my next point is. That means to celebrate. All these values that you can count into making yourself healthier and happier, they need to be celebrated. Not by anything big, but just acknowledge them and keep that motivation going. And then we have to talk about rebounds from lows. If you have really bad low blood sugars, the liver steps in and shoots out glucose to save you from passing out. Something that, of course, didn't help me in time at the beginning of the story from the beginning of my talk. But you know, doesn't work every time. And treat any possible lows with glucose tablets. This is if you can only tolerate them. They taste like chalk. You can't overeat them. And you know exactly how many emergency carbs you've taken. Otherwise, it's very easy to go into the kitchen and just roam around, eat whatever you find, and end up with really, really high spikes in blood sugar, which is what we're trying to avoid in the first place. Point 4 is stress. Stress causes insulin resistance, which means that you're not as sensitive to the insulin that you take or that you make when you have stress hormones present in your body. Like right now, for example, I don't want to know what that CGM says. Stress can, of course, be external, but it can also be internal if you're putting too much pressure on yourself and trying to achieve goals that you are not quite ready to reach yet. And another thing that's really important is that you have to accept when something goes wrong. When you get a bad blood sugar reading, or you even have a whole off day or week, because you're not more than human. And living with diabetes is a bit like living with a really stubborn toddler. It does whatever it wants and pays very little attention to what you want it to do. Inflammation causes stress in the body, and this can, of course, elevate your blood sugar levels. Emotions are also a big stressor, can be at least, as is the wrong nutrition, the wrong relationships, or a workplace that you're not feeling too hot about. Fears is the next one, and this is, of course, especially for a diabetic, the fear of the future and fear of complications and the real possibility of losing your sight, your limbs, an organ. As we saw in the graph I showed you, they are possibilities. And fear takes over if you give it too much space, so it's really important to take very good care of yourself. And for example, if you're trying to relieve stress, try something like yoga, meditations, mindfulness, visualizations, affirmations, relaxations, and they're all great tools, but nothing beats proper sleep. That's the #1 stress killer. So, here we go again, Daryl. Movement is my big point. And you're clearly the king of movement, but I just wanted to bring it up anyway, and I know you were hoping I would skip it, but I'm sorry, it has to be in. So I technically mean exercise when I say movement, but I don't want you to set your bar too high, because then we circle back to the stress point I just mentioned. So, as Daryl's already said, move, enjoy, forget heart rates, optimal fat burning zones, and having the proper equipment, just move. Movement is life, whether that is through walking, jogging, yoga, biking, stretching, swimming, whatever you think is fun, just do it, just move. Because movement improves your insulin sensitivity, which makes your blood sugar more it answers better to treatment. So get your blood flowing daily, because if you don't move, your insulin can't move around your body either. So in summary, we've talked about, I've given you my 5 best tips on lowering your A1C. The first one being eat low carb, how low carb is individual, and maybe intermittent fasting is something for you. Medications, do you maybe need to make any adjustments there to get more stable? Keeping an eagle eye on your blood sugar levels. Do you know where you are at most of the times of the day? Stress less, where can you do that in your life? And move every day. How you move is up to you, just do it. So I know this was very fast, but I hope I've given you a few nuggets to think about, and you can download my full checklist with all the 11 points at this address. And as a final quote, already the good old Confucius knew that it does not matter how slow you go to get your A1C down as long as you do not stop. And I thought that was very applicable.
Oh, her hands are freezing.